Hey everyone, this is RemyRaccoon and welcome to the third episode of Racclog. This is a series where I talk about games I've been playing from my backlog, usually games I don't think I could dedicate a whole video to, and then give short-ish reviews or summaries of them. Simple as. I forgot to explain it last time, but each game I talk about on Racclog is subject to the 4-point raccoon scale, which is a visual indicator of how much I enjoyed the game in question. If it gets the tail wag, that means I love the hell out of it and I'd give it a little kiss and whisper sweet nothings in its ear if I could. Thumbs up means I generally enjoyed it and would easily recommend it, especially if you're into the genre. The shrug is pretty much just eh. Other people might like it, but I didn't really vibe with it. And finally, the Angie arms crossed Ransona pose means I didn't enjoy it much, if at all. And it bears saying, this is not an objective score or anything like that. I'm not saying games that get the tail wag a 10 out of 10 and games that get the a 0 out of 10. This score is only an indication of my subjective level of enjoyment. If anything, if the game gets the shrug or the arms crossed, I'd normally recommend looking the game up and checking it out for yourself if it interests you. With that being said, we got a bunch to check out today. So heck yeah, let's get into it. This time around, I'm going to start with a game that I actually didn't end up getting very far in, Horizon Chase Turbo. This is a racing game inspired by those old arcade classics like Pole Position and Outrun, where you're not so much turning as you are just sorta positioning yourself on the track. It's hard to explain because I have little experience with this kind of racing game, but for example, in other racing games you would approach a corner by coming in from the outside and meeting the apex on the inside. But if you attempt that here, you get flung off the track and tossed about like a lollywrapper in a tornado. No, you basically have to start turning from the inside, which feels really weird, but that's not why I ended up dropping this. I got used to that just fine. What did make me quit was how punishing it was. Each race has points to earn, most of which are from coming first and some of which are from nabbing tokens that are laying around on the track. To get the maximum amount of points from any race, you need to come first and grab all the tokens in a single run, which is a hell of a lot easier said than done. Getting to first place takes forever. If you're in first place before the final lap, I'm convinced that you're cheating. And even then, you might not be able to grab first because you'll get blocked by the aggressive AI, and hitting the rear of any of your opponents may as well be counted as a loss because it slows you down so much. I won a bunch of races in the first chapter, but by the third I could count how many wins I had on my fingers. Heck, sometimes I would drive perfectly, not a single collision, and yet first place would still be nowhere near obtainable. And while most events don't require you to win to progress, there was a set of events that needed wins if you wanted to unlock a car, and I found that really frustrating. So unfortunately, Horizon Chase Turbo just didn't click with me. I don't want to be handed wins, obviously, but I also don't want to have to be absolutely perfect 100% of the time and be punished because the AI is unnecessarily aggressive and unruly. And it's a shame because it's got a great sense of speed, it looks really cool, and it has so much content. Several championships, endurance mode, a meaty campaign mode, and several DLC ones, one of which was inspired by the late great Ayrton Senna. There was a really good video about that DLC by Indie Jacob that literally made me drop what I was doing to go download the game and try it out. Great video by the way, you should go check it out. But yeah, nah, it just didn't click with me. For how bumpy and grindy it can be, and with how narrow some of these tracks are, I really feel like you shouldn't be as heavily punished as you are for hitting opponents. It just wasn't that fun to me. It's probably an unpopular opinion though, as Horizon Chase Turbo is a pretty well-liked game, so if this looks good to you and you want a real meaty slab of content to work through, check out some other reviews, or I don't know, just buy it. You'll probably like it. I didn't, because I'm bad at video games and my opinions are shit. Remember when I said I liked Watch Dogs? That says it all, really. I think we, as the human race, have moved past the need for white male protagonists with beards and one-note personalities. I think it's time for Cat. Stray is a game I've been looking forward to ever since it was first unveiled last year. Exploring a bleak cyberpunk world, but as a cat? A premise so simple, yet so eye-catching. And I am so happy to say that it lived up to its premise. Hashtag Stray Sweep, baby! Truthfully, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect when I fired it up for the first time. I thought it was going to be kinda aimless, like just exploring this strange, futuristic city devoid of humans at your own pace, but no, it's actually a linear, story-driven adventure. Basically, you're a stray cat exploring an abandoned facility, but then you make a whoopsie and fall down a chasm and find yourself suddenly trapped within the confines of a walled cyber city, where the only trace of human activity apart from the infrastructure are the robotic companions that live there, imitating human activity. You download an AI into a little drone body and he helps you communicate with the companions, and from there on you need to solve the mystery of who this little AI guy is, where the humans disappeared to, and how to get out of the walled city. Crucially, you achieve this by being a cat. You use your tiny, dexterous body to leap great distances. You scratch things to destroy them. You meow at people. There is a dedicated button for meowing, which you can do at almost any time, including cutscenes. Like, I could just end the review right there and give it the tail wag, because what more needs to be said? Honestly, every game needs a make sound button, though people acting like Stray's a pioneer in this concept when Quake was already doing it back in 1996. This all makes it sound like it's supposed to be Untitled Cat Game, but nah, they're two different beasts. Untitled Goose Game is a sandbox where you muck around and cause problems on purpose, and while there's a tinge of that in Stray, the game's more linear and story driven. Yeah, you can muck about and do cat things if you want, but it's less about just being a cat and more about using your superfluous feline abilities to solve problems that only a cat or other small animal can solve. Scratching at a door to get someone's attention, pulling a crate off a shelf to wake someone up in the rudest way possible, and so on and so forth. Navigating about the place sometimes isn't as smooth as you'd hope. You can't jump on command and can only do so when prompted. Where you jump to depends on where you're facing, so there were a fair few times where I was trying to get this dumb cat to look to the direction I wanted to go and it just didn't seem to want to cooperate with me, which, to be fair, is an accurate depiction of cats. This isn't too common of an issue at least, and luckily, even with the occasional bit of jank, the walled city is such an enriching and beautiful place to explore. It's a familiar setting if you've consumed any sort of dystopian media before, but exploring the bloomy, neon-soaked streets from the perspective of a little critter is such a vibe. You're able to climb up air cons and pipes along the side of walls and leap across roofs and duck through holes and around torn chain link fences to access new areas, and there are plenty of objects you can climb entirely for the sake of it. Whenever I went up an escalator, for example, I'd always jump onto the handrailing because why not? Whenever I saw a stack of books, I'd climb on top, leap off, and watch them tumble to the ground because when in Rome, you know? And there are plenty of opportunities to explore at your own pace too. In fact, the gameplay's split up into two distinct parts. The first is where you'll be exploring open areas, performing tasks for people, finding items to progress, and generally just chatting with the companions and maybe giving their leg a little snug. Between these sections, however, are more linear chapters. In most of these, you'll do some light puzzles such as positioning objects to reach new areas or baiting enemies and trapping them to progress. While other times you'll do a bit of stealth, the sly raccoon kind, where you can lick an enemy's grundle and they won't notice you, but the second you step into the spotlight, you've just signed your death warrant. It kinda reminds me of Limbo or Inside if they'd been turned 3D and also had less horrific blob creatures. Mechanics are introduced swiftly and disposed of before they get too stale, which is great for keeping up a good pace, but also means my least favourite part of the game is over before long. Occasionally you'll run into zerks, these bacterial, carnivorous things that swarm you and give you the nomf if you're too slow, and avoiding them can be pretty tense. For a small part of the game you get a weapon to deal with them though, and it turns into a repetitive and slightly drawn out game of killing some of them, retreating while the weapon recharges, then killing some more and slowly inching forward. These parts aren't bad, but they do kill the tension a little, even with how easily the thing overheats. Outside of these parts though, you'll also be doing a lot of talking to companions and gathering items, which you can also show to almost any companion you talk to get some more dialogue out of them, which is pretty neat. There's also a really nice little story here. A big part of it is getting to the bottom of the mystery behind your little drone companion B12, who has lost almost all of its memory. You'll unlock memories as you explore, some of which are bits of world building while others are unmissable and slowly reveal who B12 was before all the humans disappeared. They managed to build a solid world in the meager 5 hours you spend inside of it, and there are a lot of character interactions that I'll be thinking about for some time after finishing the game. The companions share similar traits to the machines from Nier Automata. Despite being entirely artificial beings, they mimic the characteristics of the humans that left them behind. Though I think the simple humanoid designs of the companions are a lot more charming than the fucking ball on a tube designs of Automata's machines. You also can't run into the machines and trip them over like you can with the companions in Stray, so, you know, points docked for that one. I might stop here though, because if I discuss the game much further I might spoil some stuff, and I'd rather not. I'll leave it at this. Stray is not a very complex game, yet it's still satisfying to play. It's not a very content-rich game, but I came away very fulfilled. It might not have had the graphical fidelity of a first-party Sony game, but it's still absolutely beautiful, both graphically and emotionally. The walled city is one of my favourite settings for a game in some time. Rarely have I ever felt so intimidated and small, yet at the same time, so cozy. Stray is just a really, really wonderful game made with a lot of heart, and at the time of writing, this is my game of the year, both in terms of games released in 2022 and games I've played this year overall. I don't know if that's a sign that I should play more games or not, because this has been a pretty stacked year so far, but these are the short, sweet little experiences that I live for. It's on the PlayStation Plus subscription thing, whatever it's called, by the way. So you should go and download it right now if you have it. It's The Cat's Pajamas, a formidable Game of the Year contender. It's truly pawsome. You'll be feline good about yourself after you play it. This video's a catastrophe. Gran Turismo 7. Polyphony kinda dropped the ball on this one, I think. At its absolute core, GT7 plays great. It's at times the best the series has ever felt to play, but it's everything surrounding it that brings the game down. Personally, the biggest disappointment comes from the career mode. Polyphony made a point to mention that people who love the progression of earlier Gran Turismo games would enjoy their new take on sim mode, but for me at least it's just honestly really lame. Previous games would have you buy some 9,000 credit shitbox and tackle different events and championships with the aim of buying and winning more cars to partake in more events. But the structure was open-ended enough that you could take a crack at basically anything so long as you were prepared for it. That level of openness is non-existent in Gran Turismo 7, where instead the method of progression is working through these menu books, each of which gives you a basic objective like win this championship or beat this license test, or asks you to collect 3 cars of a certain make, model or division, like Corvettes or Audis or something like that. Progression through this is annoyingly linear. I was hoping that eventually you could at least pick and choose which one you wanted to tackle next, but instead you must complete all 39 of them in the order they're given. On top of that, cars are given out so frequently that you'd be forgiven for mistaking this for one of the more recent Forza games. Never in my life did I expect to play a Gran Turismo game that handed out cars like a Forza game, and yet here we are. I wouldn't mind this progression system if there was at least a wealth of events left over after beating the menu cafe stuff, but there really isn't. Once you beat that, the World Circuits mode, which is where you find events, is annoyingly barren, with Polyphony promising the eventual addition of new events to keep players invested, as they've noted that this is a game they want players to appreciate from a long-term perspective. To which I say, can we not? I am honestly very tired of games releasing this way. Gran Turismo 3 and 4 are so chock full of events that keep players busy for at least 100 hours if they want to go for 100% completion. Like, heck, probably even longer considering the endurance races. I honestly don't think there's any reason why there shouldn't be just as many events here as there was in previous games, and I also don't see any reason why events needed to be split up depending on which track they take place at, rather than grouping them into championships and event types like they used to be. Sure, you get events labeled with things like Sunday Cup and FR Challenge or whatever, but it just doesn't feel the same, doing these individual races instead of working through a small series of them. Receiving reward cars after almost every race also doesn't feel as rewarding as receiving one after completing a cup or a championship, and especially not so considering your rewards here are rather pedestrian offerings like Camaros and Skylines instead of concept cars, tuned cars and weird stuff. The Sunday Cup in GT4, for example, gives you the Auto Bianchi A112. What the fuck is an Auto Bianchi? I don't know, but I want more weird and unique shit like that. But instead, GT7 feels more like a celebration of the ordinary rather than the extraordinary. You can pull up to the cafe in a Toyota Yaris and someone's floating JPEG head will pop up to gush about it, and that's all well and good, and sure, GT's always been about driving everyday cars, but something about GT7 feels even more pedestrian than before, to a point where it just isn't as charming. I'd almost call it bland. I'm not really motivated to work through the game and unlock new vehicles when it's stuff I've seen so many times before in other games. If the main leg of the career had made any attempt to use race cars beyond the GT3 class or any of the Vision GT vehicles specifically designed for the game, then maybe I would be more forgiving, but instead the whole time is spent driving Skylines or Supras or whatever else the game throws at you, allowing for little room for experimentation and variety. God, please, just throw in some races with concept cars, man, or a Daihatsu midget, something! As it is, the cafe mode is a really cool ode to motor racing history, but it's not a good single player mode, and it feels like the very antithesis of what makes Gran Turismo so special. What stings the most is that GT7 is, most of the time, arguably the best the series has ever felt behind the wheel. I've been playing Gran Turismo PSP recently, and while I will admit that I'm actually enjoying that more, something you will never hear anyone say ever again, the difference in physics between that and GT7 are like night and day. Cars in the PSP version, as well as 4, have a tendency to lose a lot of speed when easing off the accelerator and leaning into turns, more so than any other game I've played. But thankfully, that's not an issue here, and much like GT Sport before it, I always feel like whenever I play it, I'm actively becoming a better driver. In video games at least. It's always so easy in the recent GT games to incrementally adjust my steering without resorting to tap steering like I would in Forza or any other arcade racer. It just feels so natural. And while I'd hesitate to call the environments top-notch, the cars certainly are. They look fantastic, and they have a bunch of customization options to boot. I'm not a fan of the overall selection of cars, it feels very run-of-the-mill, but at least they look the part. When I'm in-game, racing about, not worrying about everything else, I'm having a dang old time. And then I get booted back to the menu and the problems arise again. The economy sucks huge chunks for one, or at least it did, it might not now at the time of writing because I haven't had a go at the game for a while, but before I left, races were worth fuck all and some cars were worth 20 million. Microtransactions in the game feel very dubious in this case because these cars will rotate out on a regular basis, so if you want that car, you either grind like you just picked up a pair of grind boots on Nebula G34, or you pull out your wallet and fork out $300, and I'm not even kidding, the most expensive cars will cost you 300 Aussie dollary dues worth of microtransactions. Really sit there and think about that for a sec. And then it's just a bunch of minor stuff that piles on top. The music blows chunks, sure, Daiki Kasho is here and a lot of that kicks ass, but the entire soundtrack is either Daiki Kasho, a bunch of royalty-free sounding rock instrumentals, and some annoying rap song that has Knuckles in it. What happened to all the licensed music? And why are they putting this less than stellar collection of music in the forefront with the music rally mode? A timed rally where seconds are replaced with a timer that ticks down with every beat sounds cool, but not when it's some royalty-free rock or classical thing. Even painting your cars has to be a whole fucking process. Can't just change the base color? No, you gotta go into the library editor and do it from there. You can always download other people's libraries, of course, but to do that, you have to search for them, save them to your collection, then go to GT Auto and apply it there. After you pay a fee, of course. And look, this is a minor nitpick, but when they said they'd be bringing back circuits from the old games in the series, I was maybe expecting a few more than just High Speed Ring, Deep Forest, and Trial Mountain. And considering Polyphony said they were updating the old tracks to better accommodate a 20-car grid, the first half of Deep Forest doesn't suit a full grid of races at all in my opinion, but still, where's Midfield? Seattle, Grand Valley. Heck, correct me if I'm wrong, but the track list is basically every track from GT Sport with the 3 quote-unquote new additions of tracks from the first game. There's not a lot of content here for people who already poured a fair amount of time into sport. And do not get me started on rally racing. They should have dropped rally events after Gran Turismo 3 at most, but they're still here for whatever god-awful reason they could think of. It's always been the worst part of Gran Turismo. It barely feels like actual rally or even rallycross racing. And the physics, even after a few updates, are still well and truly balked. Dude, all I did was take the inside of a corner, that's how bad this is. Gran Turismo 7 pisses me off more than I enjoy actually playing it. It's a game that feels too influenced by modern day design and the ever-present fear of missing out that other games like Forza Horizon have encouraged, while still feeling frustratingly archaic in other ways. Is it trapped in the past? Is it a victim of the future? Is it both? Whatever it is, I'm pretty disappointed. I kind of feel like I spent $125 on GT Sport 1.5 considering the lack of new content, and from what I've seen, some people feel they've bought a game that's actually inferior to Sport, especially if you play online. An area I don't want to dive into any further than that because the day I dedicate myself to an online game is the day Australia wakes the hell up to themselves and allows raccoons as pets. So for now, this generation remains without its benchmark racing game, at least to me. And whenever I need my Simcade fix, I'll probably just boot up PCSX2 and smash out some Gran Turismo 4. I eagerly await the day where I no longer have to do that. So Racclog has been really fun to work on so far, but one issue I have is that sometimes I'll play specific games with the intent of talking about them in this series, but then I find I have so much to say about that particular game that I decide it's more deserving of its own dedicated video. I mean, I guess it's not an issue technically speaking, but for example, I was going to talk about the Half-Life games on here, and that's kind of maybe its own video now. And Fuel had its own segment written up before I revamped that part of the script to be its own video too, and it very nearly happened with Psychonauts because this game kicks ass, dude. But I also don't feel like I have that much to say about it. At least not anything that hasn't already been said in NitroRad's video on it. I'd very much recommend checking that video out because it's super well done, but it also reflects my thoughts on the game almost down to the letter. Psychonauts has you playing as a boy named Rasputin, with a gift for all things psychic. He sneaks away from his home at a travelling circus and breaks into a government training facility disguised as a summer camp, with the aim of honing his skills and becoming a psychonaut before his parents come and take him away. Of course, it's not that simple, as suddenly the brains of Raz's fellow camp buddies are stolen, sucked clean out of their heads like me with a bag of jelly cups at 4 in the morning, so it's up to Raz to get to the bottom of things. Psychonauts looks like a pretty simple 3D platformer from the outset, and it sure feels like that for around the first half an hour at least, which may have contributed to why every time I tried to play this game in the past, I just ended up putting it down, because Coach Oleander's training course didn't do much for me then, and even now I was kinda like, Okay, so when does the critically acclaimed cult classic actually start? But as the game progresses, it feels a bit more like a hybrid between a platformer and an old point-and-click adventure game. Not at all surprising with Tim Schafer at the helm, but that's when it becomes something really great. The game encourages a little bit of experimentation by regularly putting you into scenarios where you need to use one of your powers or something from your inventory to progress, rather than simply jumping over a pit or smacking a guy. For example, a late game stage has you purchasing paintings and hanging them on walls, and depending on which painting you select, it'll form a surface you can climb to a new area. Or in another, you need to use your telekinesis to rescue a turtle, but to get it into a position where you can lift it out of its confines, you need to lure it by using a piece of birthday cake you obtained earlier. Which sorta invokes that old trial and error playstyle of point and click games where you just try different combinations of things hoping something works, because unless I miss something, at what point is it established that this turtle likes cake? I mean, it's obvious you gotta use the cake because you just picked it up 30 seconds ago, and I guess pretty much everyone likes cake, but sure. If you're not using items to progress, you're making use of the various psi powers you acquire over the game. And one of my favorite things about these abilities is that almost all of them see equal use throughout the game. You start off with nothing but a 3-hit combo and an aerial attack, but you quickly get access to the Psi Blast, which will likely become a key staple in your arsenal. Not long after that though, they start giving you all sorts of cool shit. Levitation lets you roll and bounce all over the place. There's an invisibility power-up you use more than once, unlike someone. There's a shield power-up that gets a lot of use as well, unlike someone. And you'll even fall prey to the voices inside your head and start lighting things on fire. There's even clairvoyance, which lets you see the world through the eyes of someone else, which is used for some clever puzzles, but you also get to see how others perceive Raz, which is such an unnecessary but very cool detail. So while, yeah, this is still a platformer, you'll still do the funny double jumps and commit animal abuse, there's a pretty big and kinda refreshing focus on the story, characters, and writing. There are a lot of cutscenes, all skippable, don't worry, but for a platformer, there's a lot more thought put into the story and writing than I expected. Exploring the camp every now and then would have been a fun distraction on its own, but pretty much every time you do something of significance, these characters all have something new to say, some new joke to bust your balls. And yeah, the humor here is on point. Especially when exploring the camp, but also during the Lungfishopolis and Milkman conspiracy levels. It's so good, dude. I just want to briefly talk about the two most famous levels before I move on to the next game. First is the Milkman Conspiracy, which is this level I'd always heard so much praise for, and oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. Not only is this level extremely funny, but it makes clever use of both your inventory and psi powers. You need to don different disguises to slip through certain areas, which you'll find by exploring the level, using your clairvoyance to get a bird's eye view and learn some passcodes, use your shield to avoid sniper fire, and then, survive being dragged to fucking hell. But, you know, all in a day's work for a 10-year-old. And then there's the Meat Circus. This is the final level, and it was infamous for being ruthless with a very sudden difficulty jump at the tail end of what's honestly not a difficult game at all. I mean, an escort mission. What a way to end a game, huh? From what I understand, the Steam version, that's the one I'm playing, has made this level significantly easier, tripling the health of the kid you have to protect, but even taking that into consideration, this level seems immensely overhated. Besides, why do people cry over the first section being so hard when the final boss is insultingly easy? Like, holy shit, I don't think I've ever fought a more disappointing final boss, and I've played Borderlands, man. All that aside, Psychonauts is a pretty easy recommend. Exploring the camp and people's minds is a real joy with how imaginatively designed they are and how good the writing is. And the point-and-click puzzle-like approach to many scenarios makes the game feel truly unique in a genre that was, at the time, oversaturated by samey collectathons. That may have been a reason why Psychonauts didn't sell, as it came at a time where even established 3D platformers like Jak 2 and 3 were adopting new gameplay styles and aesthetics. But that also may partially explain Psychonauts' resurgence in popularity and a rise to an acclaimed cult classic status in recent years. Well, that and the fact that it's also a damn good video game, and it's readily available on every major digital storefront bar the Nintendo eShop. No matter what it is though, I'm glad there's been a genuine effort to preserve it, as that allowed me to finally experience it for myself all these years later. And I'm really glad I did. Still, Tim, unblock me, please. Here's a Life is Strange True Colors review from the world's sole Life is Strange apologist. For real though, I really like Life is Strange, particularly 1 and 2. 1's a bit cringe here and there, but it's an extremely memorable tale to me, and 2 has a degree of relatability that really sucked me in. No, my little brother didn't kill my dad and I fled with him across the country, but the big bro has to look after little bro after the death of a parent thing hit pretty close to home. Both games I think are underrated, or are overhated for some pretty silly surface level reasons, but one thing they could do better is use the medium of video games as a storytelling device a little better. Specifically, Specifically, offering choices is not Life is Strange's strong suit. There are decisions to be made, yeah, but they don't do a lot with this power, or at least the first game doesn't. There are major choices to be made, usually 5 per chapter, but then the game ends with a binary choice that completely disregards any of the decisions you've made for an ending that only sways one of 2 ways. The sequel is, again, a binary choice, but there are lots of little choices throughout the game that contribute to what the outcome of your final choice will be. Each choice only splinters off into 2 paths, sure, but what happens is a direct result of how you interact with your crazy telekinetic brother, and that was pretty cool. Also, before the storm happened, I guess. So, I'm a little disappointed by Life is Strange True Colors. It's for a multitude of reasons, but not only does it walk back on the progress made by Life is Strange 2, it's the least interactive story of the series yet. Except for maybe Before the Storm, because, you know, it's a bit hard to offer a plot-altering choice at the end of a prequel that leads into another already established narrative. Have you ever wanted to slap a game? I have. Anyway, True Colors at least has a pretty interesting premise. You play as Alex, who's moving to the peaceful little town of Haven Springs to reunite with her brother Gabe, after years of being slung between foster families and in and out of an orphanage. You meet the townspeople, your future boyfriend or girlfriend, let's not kid ourselves, we're all going with Steph. But then before Alex can even spend a single day with her brother, a scheduled blast at a nearby mining site goes off, causing a rock slide and killing the poor bastard. The rest of the game has you making friends with the townspeople and helping them out with their issues, while also delving into the mystery of why the mining blast went ahead despite someone calling in and telling them to postpone. Life is Strange is all about how characters deal with having strange powers, of course, so you'll do all this by using Alex's ability to read and take on people's emotions. True Colors is basically the interactive manifestation of the me, an empath meme. It's not much of a gameplay feature like Max's ability to rewind time in the original. Rather, it's just a context-sensitive thing where you hold a trigger and press a button and then you'll hear some thoughts or unlock some memories or make new dialogue choices available. It does result in some genuinely nice moments, like when she experiences someone else's joy for the first time, but otherwise it's a narrative device that barely serves the interactive elements in any new or unique way. One of my biggest issues with the game though is its length and super weird pacing. True Colors is 5 chapters, just like 1 and 2, but the middle chapters in particular feel like they're padded out with optional content to bring the runtime up to match either of the previous games. True Colors has fewer major choices than before, and a big chunk of them are hidden in little side activities that have little to no bearing on the main story. I mean, I think they're side stories, I didn't skip them, but they sure felt like they were skippable. Helping Eleanor with her Alzheimer's, for example, hides one of the major choices in the game, yet all this does is change whether her daughter ends up learning about it and one other tiny detail at the very end of the game. Same with helping Charlotte deal with her feelings about being a single mother and what can only be described as resentment towards her child. It's an interesting scene, but it contributes nothing to the overall narrative. Say what you want about the original game, but at least choices you made felt like they either had an impact or elicited some sort of emotion after the fact. Nathan Prescott, for example, was an absolute prick most of the time, so I acted like a prick right back, which made me feel pretty shitty about my decisions when I learned about what happened to him. On the flip side, I don't really connect much with the side characters in True Colors because they're just kinda there. They contribute as much to the story as bacon contributes to hamburgers, and they feel like they're just kinda there for players to have characters to interact with. Hell, a huge chunk of episode 3 is a LARP set up to make some kid feel better about himself. Like, yeah, sure, he's upset with himself because sometimes he thinks he's responsible for Gabe's death, and the LARP itself can be kinda cool, I guess. But after this, you never see the kid again, only hearing from him via text. So, I don't know, what was the point, really? And that's how a lot of this game's interactions feel. What's the point? The main plot is about trying to uncover the mystery behind Typhon and Gabe's death, and not a lot of the game's interactions and decisions contribute to that, if at all. It honestly doesn't really go anywhere until the end of episode 4, where a big plot twist happens, but then the first half of episode 5 is Alex reliving her memories of how she lost her parents and how she dealt with being a foster child. It feels a bit like the main plot the writers cooked up didn't have enough to fill out most of the game's 5 episodes, so they put more of a focus on just interacting with characters for the sake of it. But don't get me wrong, sometimes, that's a vibe. Especially when, arguably, True Colors has the best dialogue and the least aggressive cringe factor of the entire series. Some dialogue can be interrupted by painfully long pauses, which makes some interactions more than a little awkward, but I did actually like a lot of the characters here. It's just that they do piss all. The only thing that interacting with these characters contributes to the main arc, outside of choosing your love interest, is whether or not they choose to side with you when you break into the town council meeting and start spewing a whole bunch of hooey malooey baba booey. The closest thing to a big final decision is whether or not you choose to forgive the game's quote-unquote villain or not, but it still ends all the same. The 6 endings you can achieve only change depending on who your chosen love interest was and how much you flirted with them. And look, Steph's great and all, and I'm happy for these Lepsiums, but I also just kinda don't care. Maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe I'm focused too much on the whole mining accident plotline and should be taking the other plots into just as much consideration. But they don't feel like they're a part of the main plot, they're just sorta off to the side. Things you can do before you go tackle the big mystery. And it sucks, because it feels like this improved dialogue and especially these visuals are being wasted on such an uninvolved story. Like for real, holy shit, this game is pretty! I always love the look the Life is Strange games were going for, but this is easily their best work, and they know it because there are so many gorgeous establishing shots and cutscenes and places where you can go and sit and listen to Alex's thoughts while the camera points at the environment and says, "Hey, look how goddamn beautiful that game is, dude!" Even the soundtrack is super good, which, again, not surprising for Life is Strange. So I really hate that my final opinion on True Colors is... because they were so close to making something fantastic, but with such a weak story and inconsequential choices, I can't recommend buying it. Especially considering that True Colors ditches the budget pricing of the previous games and goes full price. It is on Game Pass though, and if you subscribed, I'd say it's at least worth consideration, and there's always the chance that you might enjoy it more than I did. But nothing about True Colors proves to me that it should be a video game over a movie or a TV show instead. Good desktop wallpaper material though. The Stanley Parable is a game that's very hard to talk about because basically anything you say about it is a huge spoiler. A game about the illusion of choice, the relationship between player and creator, is such a unique concept that it's hard to discuss or analyze many, if any, aspects of it, because if I were to talk about it, I'd be robbing the player of those unique interactions and scenarios that are meant to be experienced as a player, not a distant viewer. For the most part, it's not like any other game where you can discuss it, maybe even spoil it, but you'll still want to go and play it for yourself. So how are you supposed to review a game like that? That's quite simple. You don't. Okay, I kid, and honestly, I just wanted an excuse to reference that Stephanie Sterling review of the original because it's legendary, but I'll keep this brief anyway. The Stanley Parable, originally a mod for Half-Life 2 before being released as its own game on Steam in 2013, just saw a re-release and recently made the jump to consoles under the moniker of an enhanced version, with updated visuals and a wealth of new content that adds, I'd say, 50% more content, maybe a bit more? It's a great time, absolutely, though understandably it didn't have the same impact on me in current year than when I played the original back at release. The whole meta-narrative, the relationship between player and game, the exploration of illusion of choice, it was groundbreaking back in 2013, but I think it loses a little bit of its luster nowadays as other games like Undertale, One Shot, and a fair few others have done similar things. If you haven't played the Stanley Parable at all yet, however, oh dude, pucker up, this is good shit. The basic premise is that you play an office worker named Stanley, who one day notices that all of his co-workers are gone. You start to explore the office building as a narrator, a very handsomely voiced narrator who probably gets all the bitches, narrates the story as you go, and you're expected to follow. In less than a minute, you'll be at your first major choice, and the narrator says to take the door on the left. From here, you can choose to obey and follow the story to its natural conclusion, or you can say nuts to that and go to the right. Either way, each decision has multiple branching paths that lead to different endings, almost all of which are fourth wall breaking and drive the narrator up the wall. Ultra Deluxe adds some new branching pathways, an item that alters dialogue for pre-existing ones, and plays with the idea of the game being a cheap, cash grab remaster even if it's technically not. The new stuff was all great, and I have a new favourite part of the game thanks to the skip button route, which was simultaneously hilarious while also being maybe just a little horrifying? I don't know, that's how I saw it, I'm a big baby, but that's a great way to sum up the Stanley Parable. If your gut isn't being busted, you're probably going through a small bout of existential dread. If you're a returning player, I might recommend waiting for a sale, personally, as I cleared all the new content and most of the old stuff in around 6 hours. But if you're a new player, I can't recommend it enough. Especially if you love buckets. Bucket fans eating real good. Kinda weird to think that I'm almost 29 and I don't actually own a bucket, now that I'm thinking about it. Closest thing is those huge basket things that you tend to put your clothes in, but they're annoying and sometimes those really thin handles try to cut into my finger, so they're not as cool. Anyway, good stuff. There's a reason why back when I made those crummy Sin videos and before, but I thought they were good, sure pal, keep living in your delusional little dream world. For the viewer submitted Sin section, I used Life Will Change from Persona 5 in the background. On one hand, that song plays when storming one of the game's palaces for the final time, so I thought it made sense for the final section of a video. On the other hand, and probably more obviously, it's because I fucking love Persona 5. In retrospect, I don't vibe as much with how slow it can be and how stop and start things can get during palace infiltrations, where one of your fellow phantom thieves will pull you aside to tell you what to do or explain what you're seeing or may have already deduced for yourself. I still love the game overall, but after playing some other RPGs recently, it feels way too handholdy by comparison. Either way, I missed the Phantom Thieves and was pretty excited to see them again in Persona 5 Strikers. Even if the turn-based RPG gameplay had passed the baton to an action RPG style of combat in the same vein as Musou games, like Dynasty Warriors. I never vibed with their combat much, but it's been a long time since I last touched a Musou, so I figured, you know what? Sure, it's Persona 5. Even if I don't gel with the core gameplay loop, I can at least see it through for the sake of the story, to get to hang out with Ryuji and Morgana and everyone else again. I was too optimistic, fellas. The sad truth is, even my love for all things Persona couldn't pull me through the inviting but ultimately mismatched combination of Dynasty Warriors' chaotic button mashing combat with Shin Megami Tensei's slower, more methodical and heavily story-driven approach. Striker's combat sounds kinda cool. It takes the core of a Warriors game and adds Persona 5 stuff on top, so you'll be slashing through dozens of enemies at a time with attacks that have hitboxes 7 times wider than the attack animation itself. And you'll do so with the tried and true formula of whacking square a few times, then ending the attack with a combo finisher with triangle. Kinda like how Yakuza handles its combat. And yes, I'm calling Yakuza a Warriors game. Is that a crime? Probably, sorry. On top of this though is a bunch of signature Persona 5 stuff. A big part of the combat is taking advantage of an enemy's elemental weakness, which you can do so by pulling up a list of spells with R1. This pauses time, giving you ample breathing room to think about your approach while also being able to aim where you cast your spell. Each character also feels pretty distinct with their playstyle. Ryuji can charge up attacks, Haru can make her attacks last longer by holding the attack button, Sophie's yo-yo thing has a timing mechanic, and then there's the wild card himself, Joker, who can make use of multiple personas you find both in jails and that you fuse yourself. There's a bunch of other stuff from Persona 5 thrown on top too. Baton passing between party members, knocking enemies down and performing an all-out attack, leaping onto certain objects and points in the area either for stealth or a special attack, not to mention item and equipment management and persona fusing as well. It feels distinctly Persona, from the design to the way cutscenes are done, right down to the interface, which is so cool, which is why I hate that I can't get into it. For one, I don't know if this is just Warriors combat in general or if it's Strikers specifically, but the combat has no feeling of impact. It feels like I'm slicing through air, whether I'm facing off against a horde of enemies or just a single shadow. I guess it's hard to make really impactful combat when you're fighting so many dudes at once. I don't know, but I really didn't like the feel of it. Unlike other Warriors games, you're not plopped into a level and fighting enemies the whole time. Strikers treats battles like an encounter in Persona, where you sneak up behind an enemy, give them the old ear to ear and they explode into an army of shadows, and you get EXP and stuff when you beat them all. When you catch an enemy unawares, they're stunned when you enter battle, which means you can initiate an all-out attack, which more often than not is an instant win. And if there are some stragglers who weren't caught in the blast radius, one of your fellow Phantom Thieves will just run over and take them out. At least in the first jail, this is a very frequent occurrence. It's very boring. Not only that, but it makes it very hard to become accustomed to the myriad of mechanics that the game barrages you with right from the get-go, because when you want to test things out, the enemies are already dead and you've got no place to do so. Also, choosing and buying equipment for 8 party members right from the start of the game gives me the most anxiety I've ever had in my life. Probably my biggest issue though is the return of my biggest issue from OG Persona 5. Again, everything feels so stop and start all the goddamn time. It's like, unless you're in the thick of battle, the game simply doesn't trust you to think for yourself. In Persona 5, because it was a story-based game, it melded well enough with the slower pace of the game, but in a fast-paced action game, I don't think it fits at all. Every single thing that happens has to pull you into a cutscene so the Phantom Thieves can comment on it and hint at where to go or what to do. Or rather, lay it out bare before you even get a chance to use your critical thinking skills or scan the environment for yourself. I don't need to be constantly told to get to a higher vantage point when I come across a gate I can't pass. I can figure that out for myself. I can look at the map on my own and figure out where to go, Persona 5 Strikers, trust me. So most of the time I was playing, I was just getting really antsy. I wanted to get back into the combat. I wanted to explore at my own pace, and the game just wouldn't let me. I just don't vibe with that at all. The hack and slash and the cutscene heavy nature of an RPG just don't fit together that well, or at least I just didn't enjoy it. It's too handholdy. I was almost willing to maybe smack the difficulty down and bear with it for the sake of the story, but even that just kinda has me like, not in a bad way. Like, I was enjoying it for sure, just like it didn't really seem to be treading any new ground. Basically, jails are popping up similar to palaces in the original game, and the monarch within each jail is stealing people's desires, which makes them do unreasonable things, like buy an idol's merch to the point where they're taking out loans just to do so. The appearance of jails results in the Phantom Thieves taking a road trip across Japan, which is a nice change of pace from being stuck back in Tokyo again. But so far it feels like it's just palaces but different. changing people's hearts but different. It feels like a retread, and I'm not sure how true that is the further you get in, but there's a feeling of deja vu that's kinda hard to shake. Not to mention that the flanderization of these characters is at an all-time high. Persona 5 had a bit of a problem with it, but in Strikers it borders on annoying. Ann is really into sweets and desserts and basically has brain rot for anything with sugar in it. Makoto is a living, breathing concentration of the phrase "no fun allowed." And Yusuke, shut the fuck up, dude. We get it. You like art. I really like eating string cheese, but I don't make that my whole personality. Again, not to say that the writing or even the narrative is bad, necessarily. And kudos where it's due. Newcomer Zankichi is fun to watch, and Max Middleman's performance as Ryuji continues to be one of the best things about Persona 5.
Holy shit, what have I done?
How much did this cost again?
At least a few million.
Send it back?
Sorry? I didn't get that.
Send the effing thing back!
I love this boy. Overall though, maybe I'll come back to Strikers one day to see the story through to the end, but I'll be turning the game down to easy and rushing through the jails, I think. The pacing in the actual gameplay segments is so ridiculously frustrating that I lost all interest in trying to engage with it, and at the time of writing, I'm dropping out right as I head into the second jail. It sucks, because the idea behind this is solid, and unless you were looking at the combat, you'd be fooled into thinking that this was a proper turn-based Persona 5 sequel. They did so good with the presentation. But for now, this is getting shelved. Besides, this game's automatically terrible because Sophie's a crypto bro.
The transaction was made with cryptocurrency.
You bitch! Australia doesn't put out a lot of particularly noteworthy games. Off the top of my head, we've got LA Noire, Fruit Ninja, and a bunch of licensed tie-ins from Avatar The Last Airbender to Jimmy Neutron Attack of the Twonkies to a Transformers game from around 2003 that was apparently pretty decent. With the rise of indie games in the past decade, Aussie developers have had a much larger presence. Golf Story is a fantastic golf RPG that released in the Nintendo Switch's launch window, and I have nothing but praise for Hollow Knight, a game that I believe should be twice, maybe even 3 times the price it goes for. And now we have another reason to pay attention to Australian indie developers with a little game called Unpacking. It's pretty unassuming from the initial impression it gives off. The gameplay loop consists entirely of opening up boxes and unpacking the goods inside. And I'll be totally honest, that gameplay loop does not hook me all that much. It can be a very tedious and repetitive affair, just like moving into a new house in real life. And I can see some people being turned off of unpacking just because of this. Something, what's the point of decorating a house if you can't do anything else with it? Something, just play The Sims, it only costs you $1,000 or so, something. Writing it off as that, I think, is doing the game a great disservice though. Like yeah, sure, it's just kind of an interactive dollhouse, but that so-called dollhouse is used in a masterful way to tell a story. It's a very simple story, but stories can get away with being simple if they're told in a unique way, and I think that may be Unpacking's defining trait. Over the course of the game, you go through 8 different moves, each one being the start or conclusion of a chapter in the life of a character who is never named, and is only ever seen through photos, albeit it's more of a silhouette than an actual portrait. Despite this, we learn so much about her life, her hobbies, the things she likes, what she aspires to be. You start off in this character's childhood in the year 1997, and you watch her grow, follow her dreams, find love. Which also means you're there when she inevitably reaches her low points, when not everything goes the way she hopes, and she faces dejection. And all of this is told without a single line of dialogue. There are no voices, apart from the song at the very end of the game, and there are no lines of text outside of the single-line diary entries at the end of every level. Everything else is presented to the player by means of simply pulling things out of boxes and putting them on shelves, and it's incredible how much they're able to convey through this relatively simple mechanic. Early on, the main character attends university, graduating presumably in some sort of art field, as some of the objects you unpack are art supplies, visual diaries, and drawing tablets. Later down the line, she moves in with her boyfriend, whose place has music memorabilia scattered all over the place. While you're able to rearrange most of the boyfriend's stuff to the point where the game gives you an achievement for sorting out his sock drawer, as if having an organized sock drawer is something people do. Dumbass. The game does not allow you to rearrange anything on the walls, leaving you with no place to put your Cert 4 in how to draw hands good. Objects will flash red if they're in a spot where they hypothetically should not be, and there's no other place to put the certificates, so it definitely stung a bit when the game considered the level complete when I crammed it under the bed. And through this one interaction with the game's mechanics, I was able to form a clear picture in my mind of a character I'd never met and a relationship that was never meant to be. And thus, I think Unpacking is a perfect example of how games can be an art form. It tells its story solely through its gameplay and mechanics. It paints a picture of what happens, but lets you draw your own conclusions about some of it. To put it simply, this is art, with a 1000 gamer score. Because Unpacking is a pretty simple game otherwise though, there's not a lot else I can say about it. The gameplay never really mixes itself up, and the only challenges occasionally come from figuring out where certain objects go and how to arrange everything without the big red outline coming in and saying, excuse me, the laptop does not go in the bath. There are also stickers to collect for the game's photo mode, which you unlock by placing objects in certain ways, like doing some quick maths on the fridge or making the mannequin dab. Yes, I had to check what year it was too. So while I'm not in love with the gameplay, I'm in love with Unpacking as a piece of art, as a unique experience you simply cannot find anywhere else. And despite my own opinions, I absolutely think there's an audience who will just love this game's simple structure of just placing stuff down and rearranging it. It's only 3 to 4 hours long and it's available on Xbox Game Pass, so it's totally worth checking out even if you think you might not like it. You may even come out pleasantly surprised and perhaps even moved by the game that has absolutely no dialogue, you weirdo. Also, can we get a plushie of this little fella? Please? And that's it, Racclog 3 done and dusted. I do apologise that this one was a lot more negative than usual, but I'm not gonna lie about how I feel about a game, dude. Persona 5 Strikers is objectively that bad, I'm sorry. Am I /J or /Circe? You'll never know. This episode was supposed to come out much sooner, but between getting addicted to Days Gone, which ate up most of my time gaming, and checking out a whole bunch of movies I'd never seen, I didn't get to play a lot at the start of this year. Heck, even now I'm neglecting gaming so I can pump out Stranger Things, the show, not actual Strange Things, you lewd bastard, but I have been playing other stuff, or at least have my eye on stuff I want to play soon. I'm partway through LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, and I honestly can't tell if I like it or not. As a new Star Wars fan, it's cool getting to see all my favourite scenes and moments plasticified, but the gameplay is also incredibly simple, and I'm not yet sure if that's to its detriment or not. I played Brutal Legend. I was going to include that in this Racclog, but I cut it for time, so I'll probs talk about that in episode 4. It's kinda shit. I've also been playing Blue Dragon, and I'm going to save my thoughts on that for now as it's getting its own video, but I mostly wanted to smash through it so I could see where the developers Mistwalker improved for their next game, and one of my favourite games of all time, Lost Odyssey. Reviews for both in the future? Count on it, honey. Halo. I'm finally getting around to playing the series for the first time as a distant admirer. Technically, I have played 1 through 4 before, but it was with my roommate basically holding my hand through heroic difficulty, which kinda sucked as someone who was awful at FPSs at the time. I mean, I still am, but Halo might get its own dedicated video, but at the very least you'll hear what I think in Racclog soon enough. Psychonauts 2 is obviously on the radar, but I want to check out some other games first, namely Demon Turf. I've owned it since launch, but Nitrorad's video on it has really made me want to finally get around to it because it sounds incredible. I also started playing the PS1 Gran Turismo games thinking, oh yeah, that'd make for a cool video, only to remember that I kinda sorta really fucking hate how these games basically force you to grind the same few events over and over until you have enough credits to progress to the next set of events to grind. Plus the physics suck in the first game and the AI in the second makes me want to kill again. So probably not, haha. Anyway, I've been here long enough. Here's some patrons. Hey, thanks to Furball, Sofox, K, Damien Maxted, Nation McAltal, Aetheric Ruby, Alex Preston, Hehoot Skyet, Jayet, Johannes Anderson, Kurote the Kitsune, Leo Alex 50, Pear Basket, Phil Belk, Run Fast S Smith, Scadius Grim, Squid Superstar, The Dervinator, Zip, Sadie Killer, Chris Firebolt, Progrock Furry, and Purple Spyro Fan. Next video is the 50th episode special where I am going to be ranking my favourite Ratchet & Clank games from, worst to best. And then after that, I'm just gonna shoot the shit, see where it goes, and yeah. So, yeah, catch us next time. Be good. Or else.